Now we're here at the Orange Blossom Lodge number 80 in Kissimmee, Florida, and I joined this lodge about 2 years ago. Well, growing up, my mother was an artist, so my earliest memories, I can remember myself drawing and painting and experimenting with clay and all those things. So, but the very first serious attempt at drawing, I want to say it was around the age of 10, where I was enrolled in a class in the old city of San Juan. So my father would take me to Cataño, or across the bay from San Juan, to take a ferry, and I would walk a few blocks up to my class, and that's when I first had a serious encounter with art, where I had a purpose and I really wanted to do something new and different and challenging every single time. When I was in high school, my grandmother passed away, and at her funeral, different people were taking time to say nice things about her and remember her memory and that sort of thing. And I remember distinctly, there was this one man who stood up and started speaking about my grandmother, how strong she was, what a powerful, how a powerful presence she had. And this was true. They used to call her the lioness. And at one moment he said, no wonder her son, and he proceeded to say his name, turned out to be such a great leader in our community. As you know, he is the worshipful master of our lodge here in this place. And I was taken aback because I had never heard those terms. I didn't know what a master of a lodge was. I didn't know what Freemasonry was. But the one thing I knew is how much I admired my uncle. I really liked how he presented himself. I really liked how he spoke. I liked how he encouraged people always to be better. And that sparked the curiosity in me to try to learn a little bit more about what this Freemasonry thing was. And so that's the earliest interest I ever had about Freemasonry. I joined in 2009 Eola Lodge number 207 in Orlando, Florida, and I was initiated there, passed, and I was raised at Oviedo Lodge. When I first joined, I, of course, didn't know much about Masonry, and I had a vision of what would happen inside of the lodge. And for the members of the lodge, people that are given admittance to our fraternity, they get to corroborate whether those expectations are real or not. Like, what does happen behind closed doors? And when I joined, I had the fortune of being initiated, spent some time as an entered apprentice trying to learn more about that particular degree and its practical applications to my life. Then given the opportunity to pass to the fellowcraft degree, and then eventually, after spending some time there, being raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason. Now, once I became a Master Mason, I had a little bit more access to understand how the initiation process works, how going through the degrees work. I became more familiar with appendant bodies, and I made a commitment that I did not want to join any appendant body until I had spent a good amount of time as a Master Mason. I thought these are things that can take, the lessons that are contained in Masonry can take forever for a man to apply properly to their lives. So I wanted to give myself some time. And then I made the decision that after I spend 2 to 3 years as a Master Mason, to petition for the Scottish Rite degrees. And I went the Scottish Rite route because I was more inclined to learn about the diverse esoteric areas of Masonry, the different lessons that could be understood from different traditions and cultures around the world. I was very curious about that, so I was very pleased with what I found in the Scottish Rite. So I'll tell you about the Winding Stairs. Is the program that I started back in 2013. when what was happening at the time for me is that because I worked from home and I had started growing my family, we had our 2 young kids, I had very little flexibility to go to lodge. And I wanted to still have a commitment to research things about Masonry, find discussion topics related to Masonry to share with people. At the time when I was in lodge, I spent time involved in the degrees and mentoring and doing different things that involved me helping other people in their journey through Masonry at the same time that I was improving myself. And because of the lack of flexibility that I encountered, because my wife had to work, she worked outside of the house, and I was home most of the time and couldn't commit to be an officer or commit to be a steady mentor for anyone. I thought, if I start a podcast, which I had listened to many of them before and I had derived great pleasure from them, including the Digital Freemason and Ex Oriente by Eric Diamond, who now is a friend of mine. I thought, well, if I do this, I can spend some time researching a topic about Masonry, and I can distill it in a way that is going to be attractive to brothers who may share the same limitations in time as I do. And of course, I thought, if this helps a couple of brothers out there that might not have flexibility to go to lodge, and I also imagined brothers that couldn't travel because of their age or any kind of illness, they could still engage in some sort of Masonic discussion or Masonic education virtually. To my surprise, as soon as I started producing the episodes and putting them online, and I start seeing the number of downloads that it was having, people from hundreds of different countries. At one point, I think 120 different countries were producing downloads. So there were people listening to what I was saying about Masonry. And granted, full disclosure, nothing that I share in the podcast is Masonic secret. Everything that I would talk about in the podcast would be related to the practical application of the lessons of Masonry into one's life. I was very surprised when I saw the reach that it had, and I started hearing the feedback from the people that listened to it. People that either were working remotely away from the lodge, now had an opportunity to listen to something related to Masonry while they were traveling. And it was very fulfilling to see that even though I couldn't leave my house, I was still engaging in some fellowship with my brothers, and I was being able to still execute in the things that I wanted to do, which was to help other men become better. So a few years after I had started the Winding Stairs and I had amassed a decent audience, there were a steady group of brothers that would listen every time, that would engage in conversations online. I received a phone call from Robert Johnson, who is the host of Whence Came You podcast. This is another one of those podcasts that to me was very important, because as I was joining Masonry and couldn't go to lodge, I was still listening to some Masonic education through him. So he reached out to me, and we had already communicated in the past. He and I had worked, done some collaborations for the project, and he reached out to me saying that they were thinking of starting a roundtable or a group of brothers from around the country to talk about Masonry live on video. And I was very interested. When I knew that he was on board, I started getting to know John Rourke and Jason Richards, and eventually Nick Johnson joined us. So that was the original members of the Masonic Roundtable. I have always competed against myself when it comes to creating art. So I'm always trying to push my comfort level and try to dominate new techniques and new art forms, but always keeping in mind that there are things that I want to convey with my art. And I've had the fortune to to be recognized for my artwork in the community and around the States for various things, and mainly the message that comes from the paintings. I usually have a life lesson or some sort of message that I want to convey through my painting. And I try to do so in a way that is attractive to people, so that just by a glance they can see the art and be attracted to it, and become curious about what the message is. As soon as I was initiated into Freemasonry and I had the opportunity to see the tracing boards and all the different symbolism, I instantly became very curious about if I would be able or allowed to create art with these symbols. I thought it was beautiful to see them, and especially the power that was behind those symbols. I was a professional artist before I was a Mason, so I utilized the language of symbolism to try to convey lessons, convey histories, and I became very excited about seeing all these symbols and exploring what they meant. So, but I was afraid to engage in it without permission. So I waited until I was a fellow craft before I ever created any symbols. And I did so after I reached out to the worshipful master of the lodge. I asked for his advice to see if it was okay for me to do that. And, of course, I was informed that as long as I didn't reveal anything that would go against my commitments as a Mason, then I was welcome to utilize my talent to share some of the lessons of Masonry as art. So this piece is one of the components of the first collection I created. It's called the Masonic Light Collection. And in it, I wanted to include some of the symbols that we utilize in the degrees. And I created this for me. I took some real parchment paper and I created a sketch of the squaring compasses, and I wanted to have the lights and all these symbols that meant something to me. Because I wanted to have around me in my studio, in my office, I wanted to surround myself with art that reminded me of the lessons that I was learning in Masonry. I started creating them after I asked for permission whether I could create art related to Masonry or not. And once I spoke with enough brothers that I respected, and I understood the value of creating art that reminds people of Masonry without revealing anything secret, then I felt comfortable, and I started creating art that, first of all, I loved, and hopefully it helped other people in their journey. This one is called Raising Light, and it's a Master Mason representation. And I created the original using parchment paper, ink, charcoal, and chalk.